Hey there, welcome to Ready, Set, Question, a place dedicated to helping you build your faith one question at a time. I already messed up. Today's question, what should the question be? Should we talk about the lost tribes of Israel?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to go there. Is this kooky weird stuff, or is this...
Right.
I don't know or is there some evidence that this might be... There might be something to this.
Today's question, has one of the lost tribes of Israel been found? Hey, what's up guys? My name is Willie and welcome to Ready, Set, Question, a place dedicated to helping you build a reasonable worldview one question at a time. Do you like upbeat, Jesus-centered videos that proclaim biblical truth? Well, take a second and subscribe. And before we jump in, I want to invite you into something really cool. Okay, so I'm building a team of like-minded believers here in Los Angeles and around the country. And if you like what's happening on this channel, let's work together, okay? All right, details can be found at readysetquestion.com/cool stuff. All right, today we're gonna be diving into an interview of a gentleman who wrote a book about a potential lost tribe of Israel. Check out this interview. Hello, Rich, tell me about yourself.
I was born here in Santa Monica, grew up, went to UC Santa Barbara. 1994, I went to Kyrgyzstan. And when I was in Kyrgyzstan, I just started learning the culture. I was working with farmers and up in a rural setting. I'd watch them kill the sheep, pray to their God, and jump in with their religious practices and their cultures and their traditions, their festivals. And the more I was up there, the more I felt like, wow, these cultures are very, very similar to the ancient Hebrews. And the Kyrgyz had been nomadic before the Soviets came in. So I was working with farmers and enjoying the festivals and even the traditions. They slaughter a sheep, and I noticed that when they slaughtered a sheep, like they wouldn't take an axe out like the neighboring tribes would, or even like Westerners would. They wouldn't cut through the bones like the Uzbeks and Kazakhs do, but they would take a small knife and cut at the joints. And I remembered a verse from the Torah where during the Passover, Moses says, don't break the bones. And so the sheep was cut at the joints and bled, and the Kyrgyz would also bleed a sheep just like the ancient Hebrews did. Even their yurt, so the Kyrgyz have this beautiful yurt, the door faces east like the tabernacle of Moses, and all the framework inside the yurt is painted red. And when I asked the Kyrgyz, like, why do you paint this red? They would say it's symbolic of blood. Again, so Moses painted the doorpost and the door frame with the blood. That's where the word Passover comes. The spirit of death would come and see the blood over the house and then pass over and go and find someone who wasn't covered with the blood. So even these kind of biblical concepts were in some ways, like you could see the remains, or I like to say the artifacts of these ancient this ancient story in the in the Kyrgyz traditions.
Well, don't they just get this from reading the Bible?
Well, this is the Kyrgyz. If you can imagine, they're like as far away from the Judeo-Christian world as you can be. They were locked in the former Soviet Union for 70 years. Before that, they had been in part of Islam. They'd been in and out of with the Chinese. They've been conquered by the Chinese. So no, they haven't had a Bible for centuries. One of the debates I've had with other scholars is whether they had the Bible 5 or 6 or even 1,000 years ago, 500 or 600 or 1,000 years ago. So where are these traditions coming from? And they're endless. There's endless traditions. There's one place where Isaac is going to give a blessing to his son, and the son goes out to kill a deer, and the other son comes in and prepares a lamb for him. Isaac's pretty blind, so he doesn't know which son it is, but he eats the meal, and after eating the meal, he gives the blessing. And the Kyrgyz have a similar saying. It's like, without a full plate, there's no blessing. So you have to have the full plate, eat the meal, and then you give the blessing. And so even like really small traditions that most people wouldn't pick up from the Bible when they're reading through, the Kyrgyz are still doing that to this day. So did they get it from reading the Bible? Not in the last century or 2 or 3 or 4, but maybe they did 1,000 years ago. But there's one thing that's really interesting about the Kyrgyz. So I started making these similarities with between the Kyrgyz and the ancient Hebrews. And at first my list was 20, and I just thought it was kind of cool, and like some bridges. And then my list grew to 50. And when it got to 70, and some of the similarities between the Kyrgyz and the ancient Hebrews, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, were so exact that I got to the place where I was like, God, the Kyrgyz had contact with the ancient Hebrews sometime in history. Please show me. And I really started begging God, just asking God, where was the point of contact? And I went back to Scripture. I looked at tribes that lived around the Hebrews, like the Moabites and the Amorites and Ammonites, and I tried to see, could it have been that the Kyrgyz were descendants from the Moabites? And I looked at the Moabite history and didn't find enough evidence. Maybe a few things that kind of matched up, but it didn't seem really possible. And then a year, I was doing that for a year and kind of losing hope. But my list during that year, my list of similarities went from 70 to 100, and then from 100 to 120. And it was just like, this is crazy. There's so many similarities, and they're not the typical archetypes like Carl Jung would say. Like Carl Jung's archetype would be something like an old lady who can't have children, has a child, and the child becomes the hero or savior. So that would be like a Sarah story. Mm-hmm. And those type of things did exist for sure, but a lot of the similarities were like, they're not typical archetype type similarities. So, mm-hmm. And one example that I'll give you is the Kyrgyz have this story of a hero named Manas. And Manas, when you listen to the story of Manas, he's the shepherd boy who kills a giant and then becomes the king. And so, who do you think of when you hear that?
King David.
Okay, so and Manas's best friend was the son of the king who wanted to kill him. So Manasseh's best friend, what would be the biblical parallel?
Right. Well, King Saul and
right, the bad king the king who wanted to kill him would be King Saul, and Saul's Jonathan. Right. So then you've got Jonathan, and then you've got someone who's got super strength like Samson. Right. You got the.
You're gonna quiz me. You're gonna keep quizzing me.
you got the Samson story. And then at one time they were being oppressed by the Mongolians. They were up in Siberia. And all the time they're being oppressed by the Chinese and the Mongolians, and they decide to leave. So they don't have the 10 plagues, but they actually leave the Siberia and they come back to the fatherland. And in their fatherland was modern day Kyrgyzstan, an area called Talas and the Seven Rivers. And so they come back, and when they do this exodus, very similar to Moses' exodus, even some of the incidences that happen along the way, like just before Moses takes the land, he kills 2 kings. And just before Manas and the Kyrgyz people, the Kyrgyz tribes take the land, they kill 2 kings also. So there's even like these little patterns. But the one thing that's amazing in the Kyrgyz exodus, it says that they came with 600,000 soldiers from Siberia. I don't expect you to know that one, but in the Torah, you read that Moses came with 600,000 soldiers. And again, as a reader of the Torah, like that's something I don't really care about. Like, I mean, 600,000, and it's something I wouldn't have noticed, but I saw I read it in the Manas epic. I saw it there, heard it, and then right about that time I was reading Exodus again, and bam, those similarities are right there. So.
Now, Manas sounds very familiar. Is there anyone in the Hebrew kind of narrative that has that name?
Okay, very good question. let me tell you the story of one time when I went up to the mountains. I was up in the mountains. I was in a yurt, and I was with a shepherd. I was drinking fermented horse milk like we do in summertime in Kyrgyzstan.
We're gonna have the recipe in the description below.
It's basically fermented milk and a little, it's actually horse milk and a little bit of yogurt culture, and mix it up, beat it, get a lot of air in there. that's the recipe.
Sounds good.
So, yeah, it's something I can only eat, or I can only drink when I'm on the mountain during summer. Right. The horses are drinking that good grass. I bring it down to the city. It's hot down there. I can't drink it, but that's another story. So one time, I'm up there drinking my fermented horse milk, and the shepherd starts to tell me the story of their hero Manas. And again, I see these similarities with David and Moses and Jonathan and Samson, and it's like, wow, this is kind of like the Bible, but different version in some ways. And then the storyteller just stopped, and he leans forward and he says to me, "Do you know the name of Manasseh's father?" And I said no. And again, with big eyes, looking forward, he just says, "Jacob." And when he said Jacob, it hit me. I mean, it physically hit me. And all of a sudden I realized, like, the one place where I didn't look for the similarities between the Kyrgyz and the ancient Hebrews was among the 12 Israeli tribes. So I was in the mountain. I didn't have my Bible with me, but I went back down to the mountain, back down to the city, to my home, got my Bible out, and all of a sudden I feel like I'm reading a new Bible. There's these 12 tribes of Israel. They were a confederation at one time. There was a dispute between Solomon's son and the tribes, and 10 of the tribes broke away from the Jews or Judeans and the tribe of Benjamin in the south. So 2 tribes stayed in the south, 10 in the north. And then the 10 in the north say they basically didn't follow the Lord. God sent some prophets saying, "Come back to me or else I'm going to scatter you to the ends of the earth." And they don't. And then bam, the Assyrians come and take them captive. And the Assyrians do something that's really interesting. Normally, a lot of times invaders or conquerors will just kind of kill all the men, take the women and children. But these conquerors, the Assyrians, kept the families as units and moved them to the other side of their empire, which was where Persia is and the Medes. And they used them as a buffer zone. So if the Persians and Medes ever attacked them, the first ones to get killed would be the captive Israelites. So this whole Israeli population gets moved to modern day Persia, Iraq area. And then what happens shortly after that is the Assyrian Empire shrinks, and all of a sudden these captive tribes find themselves outside the rule and reign of their captors, and they become a nation of people. And right at this time in history, this very civilized, developed Scythian people come out of nowhere. And to this day, historians don't really know where the Scythians come from. A lot of people will say they came from Inner Asia, but there's no evidence to prove that. And the evidence really points that the descendants or the people who were working on one of the great 7 wonders of the world, the Temple of Solomon, were the forefathers of these Scythian people who were good horse riders. They had developed war tactics. They worked with metal really well, high civilization. So it just all the evidence is pointing that the Scythians and the Saka people were probably the descendants of these captive Israelites. So I want to go back to Jacob and back on that mountain. So
right.
This guy says Jacob, and in Kyrgyz it's Jacob. When he said Jacob, I went back and I looked at the descendants of Jacob. Jacob being Israel and the father of the 12 tribes, and one of the 12 tribes and one of the 10 tribes that was in the north is the tribe of Manasseh. And the interesting thing about the tribe of Manasseh is actually not the son of Jacob. Not biologically, he's the son of Joseph, and Joseph's the son of Jacob. So Manasseh is actually the grandson of Jacob, right? And so what happens is, if you know the Bible, you're familiar with the story. Joseph gets sold. His brothers sell him as a slave to Egypt, and he becomes the right hand of Pharaoh. So the second most powerful in the land, and super smart. There's actually now some indication that he may have started one of the first writing systems and learned hieroglyphics and everything. Anyway, Joseph's there. He gets married to the daughter of the priest, and they have 2 children, Manasseh and Ephraim. And then when he's reunited with his father before dying says, "These 2 sons of yours born to you in Egypt will now be my sons, and they'll be called by my name, just as Reuben and Simeon are, 2 of the other brothers." So Manasseh is no longer Joseph's son Manasseh. According to the Bible, it's now, or according to Jacob's proclamation, now it's Jacob's son Manasseh.
So the grandfather adopts his grandson.
The grandfather adopts his grandson.
And becomes the father.
So
then Manasseh's then adopted father is Jacob.
Right.
In the Hebrew narrative.
Right.
So you're drinking fermented horse milk on the mountain.
Right.
And let's get back to what the gentleman told you. He said that Manasseh's father is Jacob.
Right.
But you're making a comparison to the Jacob of the Hebrew Bible.
Right.
Now, he adopted his grandson.
Right.
Okay, so then he's technically not the biological father, but now he's the adopted father. So then why do you think they're making a comparison in Kyrgyz culture, but then it's...
Okay.
Is there something there?
Yeah. Willie, let me step back. The Kyrgyz never made these comparisons.
Oh, they never did?
They never did, no. It was me who was kind of on this adventure myself. So when I heard that that Jacob was the father of Manas, the Kyrgyz Jacob, I went back to my Bible and I looked at the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 sons of Jacob.
Right.
And the thing that's interesting is Manasseh is actually not one of the sons of Jacob. He's one of the grandsons. So what Jacob does, Jacob has a son. The 11th son is Joseph. The 4th son is Judah. And they become kind of the biggest players of the 12. Right? So Joseph is sold as a slave. He's in Egypt. And then he has 2 sons. And right before Jacob dies, he says, these 2 sons that were born to you, to Joseph, to you in Egypt, will now be called by my name. So all of a sudden, it's no longer Joseph's son Manasseh. Now it's Jacob's son Manasseh. So all of a sudden, we've got a character in Kyrgyzstan named Jacob's son Manas. Very, very similar. I mean, this is amazing. This similarity. If we were doing an archaeological dig, this would be like finding an exact copy with maybe one little smudge or one little difference. But this is like an exact copy of what we see in the Bible. And the thing that's fascinating about the Kyrgyz too, to this day, the Kyrgyz will adopt their grandchild as their own. So I was up in the mountains working with some farmers, and there's a man named Omar, and his son is Rizgulbek, and Rizgulbek's son is Maksat. But Omar adopted his grandson Maksat. So Maksat's name is Omar's son Maksat. I'm translating it into English from Kyrgyz. And Maksat actually calls his biological father big brother. There's a word baike. So he says he doesn't use the word father for his biological father, and his grandfather became his father. And he grew up in his grandfather's house, not in his biological father's house.
So this one family ended up adopting their grandson.
Right. And this tradition you see all over Kyrgyzstan.
Oh, so it's a cultural tradition throughout the entire country.
Right.
So it's the firstborn son or the secondborn son, or how does this work?
Oftentimes it's the firstborn grandchild will be adopted. So the Kyrgyz even have a saying, I got to think about this, but it says, your first child is your last toy, and your first grandchild is your last child. So basically what it is, if you get married and you have a child, your first child, you're giving it to your grandparents. You get a little time to play with him, so it's like a toy. So your first child's your last toy, and let me think about this again, your first grandchild is your last child. So when your eldest gives birth to a child, oftentimes, not always, oftentimes the grandparents will adopt that grandchild.
And that's a tradition that potentially goes all the way back to ancient Egypt.
It's something that the neighboring tribes don't do it. So it seems like it's the Uzbeks and Kazakhs, it's not practiced. So it does seem like it's something that goes back to somewhere. And this is again another one of those odd little things in the Bible that we wouldn't even call a tradition in the Bible. It's just something that we read about happened maybe once in the Bible, but to the exact person, it happened to Manasseh in the Bible, and now we have another character named Manasseh, and we've got people who consider themselves descendants of a man named Manasseh who are practicing the same tradition to this day.
Wow.
Yeah,
Fascinating.
It is fascinating.
So
It's absolutely
you
amazing.
started off with a list of 10 and then 20 and then 75 and then, so how long is the list now?
Unfortunately, I'm embarrassed to say this, but unfortunately, I stopped writing things down. So the list, I get to the place now where I'm with Kyrgyz and I hear something, and they'll point out, because they know my research now, so they'll point out similarities to me, and I'm no longer writing them down. But
There's too many.
Too many. In a sense, I've wanted to, and I've hoped that other people would take the research and continue with it. Unfortunately, it hasn't gone on as I had hoped it would. But I still believe the Kyrgyz are going to pick it up and run with it. The thing that's sad is that there's a lot of with every generation that dies, there's a lot of information that dies. So we talked earlier about the blood being put on the doorpost. So Moses would do that with the Passover. So I've heard people tell me that their grandmothers would put blood actually on the furniture sometimes to protect the furniture. And this is a tradition that I've never seen. I've only heard it from people. But that information, that knowledge is really dying with the generation. There's people, I've talked with people that say their grandmothers would pray, and when they prayed, they would pray. Again, if you know your Bible and the patriarchs well, listen to the differences here. They would pray to the God of Abraham, Jacob, and Joseph. So in the Bible, we talk about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But the Kyrgyz it seems like there's like some memory of the three patriarchs, but Isaac kind of gets forgotten, even though the name Isaac is a Kyrgyz name that's used quite often. And then Joseph would be inserted in there. And then again, they themselves seeing themselves as descendants of Joseph, it seems quite normal that they put Joseph in as opposed to Isaac.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have stopped keeping the list, but you have written a book.
I've written a book, yes.
So tell us about your book.
So when I learned about the Kyrgyz Jacob up on the mountain, I just did massive research. I want to find out about this Kyrgyz Jacob, the father of Manas. And it's amazing, the similarities between this Jacob and the Jacob of the Bible. Both of them were fairly deceptive individuals. And you've got to ask yourself, when you read the Bible, you've got to ask yourself, like, why on earth did God bless this deceiver? Jacob actually means deceptive, deceiver. So I think the actual name Jacob means like one who grabs the heel, because when his twin brother was born before him, and as he came out of the womb, he was holding on to his brother, if I remember that story. Anyway, so the Jacob of the Kyrgyz epic is also quite cunning and gets angry quickly. There's one time in the Bible where both of them have two wives. Okay, so one time in the Bible where one of Jacob's wives comes up to him and says, "Give me children," and Jacob of the Bible gets really mad at her, like, "Who do you think I am, God? You think I can give you children?" And there's a very, very similar incident in the Kyrgyz epic. One of the wives of Jacob comes up to Jacob and says, I can't have children, and he has this explosive anger towards her for not having children. And then in the Bible, two of Jacob's sons basically kill all the men in a village, and they're quite cunning and deceptive the way he does it. And Jacob kind of has this moment where he's self-pity and like, oh no, now the neighboring tribes and nations are going to kill me, because he doesn't really care about the people that his sons just killed. He cares about now
his own safety.
Right, his own safety. And the Jacob of the Manas epic, of the Kyrgyz story, is very, very similar. Manas kills some of the neighboring people for stealing his father's horses, and Jacob bemoans the fact that now everyone's going to turn against him, and he's going to lose everything he had. So, it's interesting that the same type of event sparked the same type of emotion in both Jacobs.
Wow.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a quick question about the epic of Manas, or the Manas epic in Kyrgyzstan,
Yeah.
right? So is this written down, or is this oral tradition, or how is this known?
So the Kyrgyz believe that for close to 1,000 years it was oral tradition, and then as the Soviets, not the Soviets, excuse me, as the Russians before the Soviets started coming into the land of Kyrgyzstan more and more, they heard the epic, and they were the first ones to write it down. So now, because it's an oral epic, and there's a number of different storytellers, there's a number of different versions of it also. There's probably about 3 or 4 popular versions of the Manas epic in Kyrgyzstan, and there's many more than that, but 3 or 4 that are very popular.
So I want to get back to something you mentioned earlier when it came to butchering the lamb.
Yeah.
Now, there was one thing that you mentioned when we were off camera, but I want you to say it on camera.
Okay.
And it has to do with a tendon.
Right. Okay. So again, this is one of those things where this cannot be an archetype, like Carl Jung mentions. This is the Kyrgyz. I noticed the Kyrgyz cutting the sheep, again, very similar to the way Moses did it.
No broken bones.
No broken bones. They bleed the sheep. Cutting at all the joints, and then at the very end, the Kyrgyz would take the hip bone, they'd put their knife down, and they'd pull out this tendon from the sheep and throw it out. And then I'd ask, like, why aren't you serving that? You serve everything else. I've been with Kyrgyz, and we eat the inside of the nose, inside of the ears, the palate, and I mean, we eat things that you can't digest. The only thing that really gets taken out is the spleen. Is that right? The spleen, yeah. And everything else gets eaten, even the intestines. So I asked, like, why do you take out this one tendon? And they would say, because our fathers have, we can't ever give it to our guests. I don't know, or they'd say, I don't know. I asked many people, like, I don't know, we just can't do it. And so I got these type of answers all the time. And then I'm reading the Bible again. And in Genesis 33, Jacob wrestles with the angel, and he holds on to the angel, and the angel actually says to Jacob, like, let me go. And Jacob says, no, not until you bless me. And then the angel's like, let me go, it's almost morning. And Jacob's holding on, and then it says the angel actually touched Jacob's hip, and Jacob became lame. And then the very last verse of that chapter says, for this reason, the children of Israel do not eat the tendon to this day. So here's this, again, obscure mention of something that might be tradition, might be a custom, might be, I don't know, just left over. But it's not left over. The Kyrgyz to this day are still practicing this biblical tradition that Jews, Christians, nobody else who believes in the Bible is doing, but Kyrgyz who don't believe in the Bible, haven't read it for centuries, are doing. And so I often had these conversations with professors and scholars in Kyrgyzstan, and one of the things that we all say on both sides, my side, their side, they all say, yeah, Kyrgyz don't believe this holy book, the Bible, but we do everything that it says, and you Westerners believe it, but don't do anything it says. So it's kind of ironic.
So we should start pulling out the tendon as a hip every time we eat lamb.
I don't know that those things are important for us today, but I'm really glad that they were written in the book. Yeah. Because for me, the book it's a history book, and now for me, the book's become an archaeological site. Like, of course. I'm just looking into this thing, trying to find like all these similarities. It's amazing.
Well, the Lord says that the scattered tribes will be brought back together at the end of this whole narrative.
Right.
So the tribes must be alive somewhere.
Right. And now I think all the evidence is pointing to Kyrgyz being one of those tribes. And it's interesting because since I've started writing about this, I've got a lot of people writing me from different parts of the world, and we actually have a very good connection right now with Northeast India. If you look at the map of India, there's this little like arm of India that goes way to the east towards Cambodia and Laos and Myanmar, and there's tribes up there that are that all consider themselves descendants of the lost tribes of Israel. And we just had a conference in Kyrgyzstan. We invited three mesos from Northeast India, and it was fantastic being together, talking about these, doing research. I also visited Myanmar, one of the Northeast states, in 2006, and had a fantastic 3 days with a scholar there who's written about this. So there's no end to where this goes. Let me jump back and say, like, when I first heard Jacob, I got on the internet and I started looking for similarities and for the lost tribes. I had no idea about the lost tribes, no idea, even though I'd read the Bible before. And then I started looking at the descendants of Jacob. I found out about the lost tribes, and then a lot of the stuff I was reading was weird, cultish, white supremacist stuff, and it really was stuff I couldn't digest. It's like I got to the place where I'd be reading a page or two that was written about the lost tribes, and it was like I just had to put this stuff down and close it up. And then I got on and I did a new look, and I found a Japanese scholar who really believes the ancient Japanese came from Israel, and that Shintoism as a religion is kind of based in some of in the Torah. So again, fascinating. This guy is a scholar, excellent scholar. And when I found his material, it was just like peace to my soul. I realized, okay, I'm not crazy. I'm not on some wacky religious track, but I'm found some serious scholastic material. So
it's amazing.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. It's so cool, and this story just it never ends. And Willie, if I could go back to the book, you mentioned the book. So I started doing a comparison between the Kyrgyz Jacob and the biblical Jacob, and the list they were both lame. So I talked to you about the angel touched Jacob on the hip, so he's lame. The other Jacob's lame. And they both have a rags to riches type of story. So they both married the daughter of the person that they were working for. So the similarities were great. I wrote an essay. I submitted it to an academic conference about the epic. And in 2006, I was invited to this conference, and I was one of I was just a speaker that was talked about quite a bit afterwards. And obviously there was backlash from, you can imagine, from some of the extremists. They're probably a very small percentage of the population. Kyrgyz, I don't consider them extremists at all, but there is that element in the population, and so they're kind of the loudest voice, as we've seen again and again in different places. Wherever
they don't want to have a connection to Israel.
They don't want any. They're trying. There's really a new phase of Islamization in Kyrgyzstan, especially in the northern part of Kyrgyzstan right now. Thousands and thousands of mosques have been built since the collapse of the Soviet Union, and so some of these people that are really pushing in that direction are trying to shut me up. And but on the other hand, there's been some great response also. So I don't want to just talk about the negative. There's one more thing I have to say about the Kyrgyz Jacob.
This is great.
So the Kyrgyz Jacob, I'm reading about the Kyrgyz Jacob, and he's also a man of faith. And he prays, and even though he's got his devious side, he prays, and he's praying to God one time, and during the prayer, there's these two lines that basically say, like, God, have mercy on me, don't break my shoulder, like, in response to my prayer. And I'm thinking, like, don't break my shoulder? Like, that's weird.
Yeah.
Do you ever pray that when you pray?
I've never prayed that.
God, don't break my shoulder?
Anybody at home?
So the thing is, if you were biblical Jacob and you'd wrestled with an angel and had your hip dislocated from wrestling, then maybe next time you're praying,
you might break something else.
You might be afraid of breaking something else, and you might pray like, God, don't break my shoulder. So there's this transition from this ancient Hebrew text that was written. When we're talking to the story of Jacob, we're talking 3,500 years ago.
Oh yeah, 400 years before Moses.
Yeah,
right.
So this is ancient history. Yeah, maybe even like closer to 4,000 years ago, and it seems like the story just jumps from this one ancient book to this other tribal epic up in the mountains of the Kyrgyz, and it just it's like fluidity between the two of them. And
wow.
So for me, I just had a blast doing this research, and
this is exciting stuff. So this is Richard Hewitt. How do you pronounce your name in
Respect?
That's pretty cool. The Lost Tribes of Israel Found. So I'll put a link in the description below to your Amazon page. Go ahead and buy it. It is just fascinating hearing this stuff.
Let me mention that
you want to mention something?
The first chapter of this is the first essay I did, the two Jacobs, comparing the Jacobs.
Oh, great.
And then every chapter after that is basically an academic essay that I submitted and presented in Kyrgyzstan. So I do Samaria from the Bible with Samarkand from the Silk Road.
I have no idea who those people are, but
they're cities.
Those are cities.
Samaria was the capital of the northern 10 tribes.
Right.
Okay, and Samarkand is a prominent city on the Silk Road, close to, or the Kyrgyz were in Samarkand at one time. Now it's close to Kyrgyzstan, in Uzbekistan.
Okay, yeah. So one more connection.
Yeah. Oh, it goes on and on.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Hey, well, thank you so much for watching today. Thank you, Rich, for being
My
here.
pleasure,
This
my
is
pleasure.
awesome. I mean,
Yep.
could we have actually found, well, you have found one of the lost tribes of Israel. This is amazing. So thanks again for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe. And if you have anybody who likes archaeology, history, and questioning of where these lost tribes might be, go ahead and share this video. All right, much love, Godspeed, and ready, set, question.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.